Call this special meeting of the Board of Education of the Grandview Heights School District to order. Beth, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bondi, Mrs. Gephardt.
Here.
Mr. Gousset.
Here.
Mr. Truitt.
Here.
Ms. Wassmuth. Here.
I did want to state, I promised Eric that I would. He is out of state, and he has pledged that he will, anybody who's speaking tonight, and Eric definitely will listen to those comments and read any emails and be fully up to speed before the board makes any decision. It's a relatively short agenda this evening. I just want to remind everybody in the room, since this is a special board meeting, we are not legally allowed to do anything outside of what's on the agenda. So our purpose tonight is really twofold. It's one, an opportunity to hear comments from the public, and number two, for the board to have some discussion about what decisions we may or may not make. We have a regular board meeting a week from today, I believe is August 11th. And at that time, any decisions, it would be our goal to make at that time. So, it certainly gives folks an opportunity to speak here, and they can also certainly speak at the August 11th board meeting. So, with that being said, the first thing on the agenda is recognition of guests and hearing of the public. For those of you that haven't heard the spiel before, I'll just sort of go through our guidelines. The board recognizes the value of public comment to school governance. If you wish to address the board, you may approach the podium now and talk about any action item you'd like to address. The board policy on public participation meeting, I believe we have those in agendas in the room for your reference. When addressing the board, please state your name and address for the record, limit comments to 5 minutes or less, direct statements to the board, do not mention students or staff by name, and of course, maintain reasonable decorum. The board will hear statements but will not answer questions or engage in debate during the board meeting. I, as board president, Andy Culp as superintendent, Beth Collier as treasurer, are willing to meet with any member of the public to answer specific questions. And then certainly, all our emails are on the website. You can certainly contact the board anytime. So at this point, I will, open the floor for public comment.
Hi, good evening. My name is Adam Leonetti. I live at 3765 Stunsale Lane, Columbus, Ohio. I have a son who goes to Grandview Heights. Thank you very much for having this meeting tonight. Appreciate it, and you're all obviously very interested and concerned. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a member of the board, and you wouldn't be making the effort that you're making to communicate with the public over this important issue. I want to say that I think that after all these months with COVID and the mitigation efforts, the various mitigation efforts that have been undertaken by federal, state, and local municipalities, we all have our opinions about COVID and about masks and about vaccinations and things of that sort, and I'm vaccinated. So I think we're really at the point where it's a matter of asserting power to make a decision, and voting is a form of power. And even though I don't live in a school district anymore, I will support any candidate for school board who is anti-masking and wants to put COVID in the rearview mirror. I vote against masks. I vote against continuing to focus on COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Name is Jeff Wall. I'm at 1130 Virginia Avenue here in Grandview. I have students in each of the three buildings and a pre-K bringing up the rear. And I would like to encourage this board toward a better way to navigate COVID. Our kids absolutely need a commitment to full-time school, regardless of what the COVID statistics are doing, going up, going down, going sideways, whatever they're doing, they need to be in full-time school. And we need a board committed to that. And we need a sensible approach on the masks. Our kids need a sensible approach on the masks. I don't want to hear any more about agencies recommending this or that. They're all over the map. You can find anybody that will make a recommendation. You can look at what might be driving that agency. I don't want to hear about what legal counsel says about risks and all of that, I need us to prioritize education. We tell our kids, think independently, think critically, don't follow the crowd, do what's right, regardless, and don't pick the most self-protective option when there's a proper, better way. That's what I need from our school board. We need independent thinking. We need to let families exercise independent thinking. We need to let families make decisions about masks, not tell everybody what to do, not adopt a one-size-fits-none policy. You can do all the reading. I think if you cut through all the noise and all the politics and all the conflicting messages, I think any of the serious scientific literature says masks provide a minimal benefit at most. They stop spittle, they don't stop airborne particles, which we now know is the real way COVID transmits. But even if I grant you masks are moderately to highly effective, they're just not necessary in this environment. We are not running a senior citizens healthcare facility. We aren't dealing with the most vulnerable. Kids are in fact the least vulnerable. Our school population is all kids and working age adults who statistically don't have this risk. And then the game has changed. Out in the wider world, there's a vaccine available for anybody who wants it. There's 16 to 17 to going on 18 months of developed immunity in our community through just natural COVID infection and recovery. Common sense says don't prioritize some low benefit option. Common sense says don't prioritize a low risk concern over your primary mission of education. Don't mandate low benefit countermeasures. We need to find a better way, and there's a better way available. It's called the N95 medical mask. It would be no thing for the board to adopt a policy that makes masks optional and strongly, strongly, strongly encourages anyone with a concern or anyone with a health issue to wear the mask that protects them. They're available now. I just have to stress over and over, we've got to use common sense. We're in year 2, we can see a pattern. When COVID arrived on the scene, it was November 2019, and it went up through the winter months in January, came down in the spring, went back up in July and August last year. You might remember that was after the protests all over the country. That was when they canceled Big Ten football. It was July and August last year. Everybody had guesses as to why COVID did what it did in July and August, but it's following the exact same pattern. It's going to go back up around Thanksgiving, and it's going to stay up through January, no matter what we do. When you look at the pattern, seasonality and region matter far more than anything human beings do. We've had periods with masks, without masks, with a vaccine, without a vaccine, under lockdown, out of lockdown. And the virus is doing the exact same thing in year 2 that it did in year 1. So we need to find a better way. It's going to be with us. The Washington Post just concluded one of their big articles last week with a surprising statement from them that it's hard to do, but I think we have to become comfortable with coronavirus not going away. And they said that in light of vaccines and, the movements around the country right now. And at the risk of monopolizing the microphone, I'm going to tell you, anecdotally, I've seen this firsthand. I've been a front row witness. We put our second grader in private school last year because we were not pleased with the decisions made for how school ran in Grandview, especially for younger kids. Our older 2 stayed in the Grandview system, so I got weekly reports from 2 different schools on what they were doing and what was happening. The private school was far less rigid than Grandview, and they kept in school every day, all year, and their COVID tracker had less hits than ours did. What we human beings do is not that big a needle mover on what this virus does. So we need to get back to in-classroom, full-time education. We need to let masks be a family decision. We've got to get back on the idea that this is we need a sustainable, long-term view of this thing, not bouncing up and down with when statistics go up, when public health agencies do their thing, when politicians do their thing. We've just got to be stable, steady, predictable for our kids, and it's not okay to say that plan is to have all these kids wearing masks forever or without any kind of exit strategy or end date. I don't want to be back here in November arguing about whether the school should shut down or go to remote, because it's going up in November. It just is. I don't want to be here begging, please, please go back to full-time school in March like we were last year. And I certainly, and I'm sure you don't, want to have me up here talking again next July or in August about masks. We've got to find a better way through. The better way is no mask mandate, optional, sensible mask policy with an encouragement to wear N95 for anyone with an issue, and we can make sure kids aren't teased about it. I mean, the teachers can do this. They can control what happens within these walls. And then I don't know if it's even on the table, but I don't want to hear the word pivot. I don't want to see anything but full-time school. That's what our kids need. We've just got to get a way to do this and not float up and down with the COVID tracker or whatever
Mr. Hall, I apologize.
politician or media member.
We're at time, so I'll give you a few seconds to finish up.
Period, done. I think my point's made.
Thank you. I always feel like that's the rudest part of my job when people are doing public participation, so I apologize for that. But certainly, if points weren't made, please feel free to email the entire board, and Andy Culp, and those comments certainly will be processed. So thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Bondi. I live at 1340 Glen Avenue. I am the parent of a rising freshman, and a 6th grader. First of all, I want to thank the board and all of our administrators for all of the hard work you do on behalf of our students. As a lawyer who has represented public school districts across the state of Ohio for over 20 years, I am well aware of what this pandemic has asked of all elected school board officials. I know it's not an easy road, and it's littered with critics. Last year, my kids stayed in the Florida Virtual School Academy option offered by this board all year long. It worked for them, it worked for our family. That is not an option this year. Luckily, some of our students here in Grandview have had the opportunity to elect to get the COVID-19 vaccine. But of course, not all of our students have had that opportunity. Students under the age of 12 have not been given that opportunity. And while I am hopeful it is on the horizon, it may not be available to them until the end of this calendar year. I am here to ask you to do all you can to protect those who have not yet been afforded this opportunity. You can do this by implementing and enforcing a universal masking policy, ideally for all students, but at a minimum for K through 12. I am well aware of the legislation that will go into effect in October, which will prohibit treating vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals differently in required protective measures, but it is not October yet. For our K through 8 students, universal masking is one of the protections that you can give to them, and when layered with other protections, we know that it works. Last spring, when we returned to All In, we learned several things. We learned first that universal masking was possible and it worked. Secondly, we learned that most kids did not passionately rebel against masks. They demonstrated to us that they could mask effectively and that they were happy just to be in school full time. Third, we know that universal masking will prevent widespread isolations and quarantines, even when there is the inevitable COVID positive case in our classrooms, because we know under the guidance that if both parties are masked, quarantine isn't required. If we want full-time school, that's how we keep them in school. Finally, we learned that quarantine is disruptive to in-person learning. It's the primary reason we made the decision to remain virtual all of last year. We wanted something that was static and constant. Let's avoid any quarantines and shutdowns when we can. In the simplest terms, wearing a mask is a protective health measure. Football helmets don't always prevent concussions, but we still require this protective health measure to be worn by our football players before they go out on the field. We don't tell them that in the name of their personal liberties, the use of a protective helmet is optional. Nor do we tell our chemistry students before they turn on the Bunsen burners and play with chemicals that those protective safety goggles are optional. The U.S. Department of Education's Return to School Roadmap released just this week encouraged layered strategies to prevent COVID-19 from spreading in our schools. So in addition to a universal masking policy, I'm asking this board to consider the layering of additional protective measures for our students. While masking is the first layer, it's followed by physical distancing. I am very interested to hear a discussion about how the new buildings will impact Grandview's ability to distance, because I know last year this board told us that we didn't have the space to maintain the appropriate physical distancing. Next strategy is improved ventilation. I'm asking this board to consider using the state-of-art ventilation in the new buildings for those students who have not been afforded the opportunity to vaccinate. I know that the plan is to put the high school students in the new building, and the master schedule is probably already complete. But please give serious consideration to putting the middle schoolers who have not had the opportunity to be vaccinated in this space as an extra safety measure. And the last layer of protection I'm asking this board to consider is to revisit its screening and testing protocols. We know that robust screening and testing will result in less quarantine and less isolation. The CARES Act gave school districts the money for BINAC's rapid testing, and we know that these tests can be administered quickly and coupled with telehealth support even when there's not a nurse available. Please consider this as an additional way to prevent the spread of COVID-19 in our schools this year. I have always loved that I have been given the opportunity to represent public school districts. I know that public education is the foundation of so much that we believe in this country. I passionately believe that educators and school board members do what they do because they truly care about kids. And I know they want to do the right thing for kids. I'm asking this board to do the right thing for our kids. Protect them with all the safety measures available to you. I am acutely aware that the decision I'm asking for tonight will not please everyone. I've had conversations with Central Ohio superintendents who have said if I support a universal masking policy, my board and I will get sued. I understand the ramifications of that. But demonstrating true and genuine leadership is hard, and I'm asking you to do that tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
May I ask a quick question for the next speaker? Just general. You had mentioned, I believe it was Senate Bill 8 that said that masking was not a...
I was referring to House Bill 244.
Did that did pass? I wasn't sure if it passed or not. That was...
The one that said we can't discriminate until October, that's House Bill 244.
Right, but there's...
It's on the books, it's a law.
Okay.
The one that didn't so far was Brenner's bill that said that would take away the right of...
All right, so it's Senate Bill 6. That was what we can't discriminate, but it was the Senate Bill, I was calling it 8. That's,
Senate Bill 6 is not a law.
that's the one that I wanted to double check on, so thank you. That was one of those, just a quick question.
Good evening. My name is Les Holler. I live at 1370 Westwood Avenue here in Grandview Heights. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to listen and hear input from community members regarding potential decisions that are going to affect our children and our community. I'd like to start by just acknowledging that I'm sure that everybody in this room has been affected by COVID-19. It could be a family member that's been sick. It could be a tragic loss in your family. It could be mental health issues. It could be change of job. It could be change in planning how you're handling things for your children at home, etc. So again, any of my comments I want to forward by saying I know it affects everybody. And I know everybody has deep feelings about what their experiences have been in the last 16-plus experiences, I'm sure, that have built into our observations, that have been into what I believe when I hear the news, when I read emails, when I see updates, when I read plans for what the school is going to do. I make observations that I have seen and that I hear from other people that I trust. There are a few things that have been, the list is long, but there's been a few things that I have noticed in my family. Number one, I work for an essential business, and we've been in business every day throughout the event. Yes, we've worn masks. Yes, we've socially distanced, and no, there wasn't a great big turning point in anything that happened by wearing masks or not wearing masks. We worked every day, we did our jobs, and we adapted, and we have had very minimal interruption to our business. I understand that isn't the case for everybody, though. That's my personal experience. Secondly, I do believe that my daughter's academic success has been affected. She's a very, very bright girl, but I do believe it was significantly impacted by the situations that have occurred in the last year. And that goes down several different roads, but the ability for teachers to conduct professional teaching as we're used to, as we're accustomed to here in Grandview, I think there was a big hit that we experienced. On a personal level also, my mother has been in isolation for the extent of this time in an assisted living facility. And I know a lot of people have been faced with those very similar things. And I mention this from the mental health standpoint of what are the effects of isolation? What are the effects of doing everything I do in a mask? And there's all kinds of different things you can and can't do in a mask, but it has been a prevalent thing for us to see reaction of isolation and mental health. So, given this situation, what are the things that I want from the school that is educating my daughter? It is more than advertised that we want to promote personalized learning. I want that. I expect that. That's why I'm here at Grandview Heights for my children. If we're distracted from that with focus on other things, we're losing, in my opinion. Teach critical thinking. That is advertised on the school's website and on many, many points of communication. I believe in it. I see it every day in my workplace. I see it every day in the community. And there are so many different examples of the situations that are presented to us as part of this pandemic of how critical thinking can be used and taught and utilized to see what is true and what is perhaps not. What is a statistic versus what is a fact? And are the statistics telling the entire situation? Often they're not. This is a simple one. I went for the school to be educators. And they can do it, they love it, they're passionate about it. And you know, I don't want mask police, I want educators. I want teachers to love what they do and do what they do for our children. Some things I do not want the school to be doing. I don't want them to pretend to be doctors. And I'm not aiming this just at the school board. That's in every staff member that represents the school. I don't want to hear repeating media talking points. Almost everybody that's talking to the media is getting paid, and they're getting paid to say what they want to say. I listen, and I believe what I believe, and I do not need that regurgitated through decisions that are made here at the school. I'm reiterating what a couple other parents have shared, but I do not believe that masks solve anything. I do not. There's part of critical thinking, and I skipped a part here that I meant to address, but what could we do as educators in this community that could be other steps toward addressing this pandemic? How are we going to deal with it? Could we put a panel of doctors on a local doctors on a Teams call to let people hear about vaccine, what is the status of the vaccine? Is it recommended for young children? That is part of education. That doesn't mean we're telling you this what has to be done. That's saying, hey, we're presenting information to you. You can do with it as you feel, but this is a panel of people that know with experience, with the expertise that can help educate us. That's what the school is for. I see very little about nutrition and the importance of how important it is for our immune systems. That's part of education. We could thrive on teaching kids, teaching families, what can we do with our nutrition that can help us through this time. It may not prevent us from contracting the virus, but it can definitely help our immune system. That is a part of education that we could be taking an initiative, taking a path to work with our students on. Lastly, I do not want the school to presume that masks solve anything. It is my personal experience. I just do not see it based on what I've read, what I've heard, and what I've personally experienced. One part of that I would mention is, there's nothing we say about what type of mask is good enough. I can go to CVS, and I shouldn't draw out any particular name, but I can buy anything that can wrap around my head at any location. What is good enough? If we want to educate people and say there's a value to a mask, what does it have to do? And again, we can educate, we can stand to gain from that. Lastly, I would ask that you make sure that your staff does not engage with students, encouraging them to get the vaccine. That is not their place. They are not experts on this. They can have opinions, obviously, but this is a very personal decision among families, and teachers should not be engaging in whether or not people should have vaccines. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Hi. I'll try to be quick. Sorry, I'm just a little rattled. My name is Dr. Jeremy Young. I live at 1190 Lincoln Road. And I'm an infectious disease physician. I'm an associate professor at OSU. Been studying the epidemiology of infectious diseases for about 15 years. And I'm here to push back, first of all, a little bit on some of the armchair expertise that's already been stated here tonight. One of our speakers said, "I believe what I believe." That phrase is killing us. I believe what I believe. Look, even before COVID, it is clear masks mitigate the risk of respiratory viruses. 10 years ago, if I saw a patient with a respiratory virus, I would mask before I went in their room. This is science. You don't have to be a scientist to know condoms help prevent sexually transmitted infections. Masks help prevent respiratory viruses. No one is going on TV being paid to say whatever they want to say. When you see a public health expert on television, they're saying the facts as we know them now. Things change over time, we learn new things, but unlike another speaker said tonight, public health agencies are not all over the place. They've been consistent. So as far as mask mandates, a couple of things. First of all, the CDC recommends them. I trust and respect the CDC. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends them. The Infectious Disease Society of America recommends them for unvaccinated children. It's crazy to me that we're having this discussion. It's a simple mask. I mean, do I think kids should wear masks during a deadly respiratory virus pandemic? It's like asking me if I think they should play Russian roulette. Of course they should wear masks. They're not vaccinated yet. And the other thing, and I would have this be part of the messaging, this is temporary, okay? The Pfizer data should be ready by the end of September for 5 to 11-year-olds. The early data look good. They've expanded the studies a little bit to include more kids, potentially with the Delta virus. But we will have data on vaccines soon. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Sort of embarrassingly, only about 47% of eligible Ohioans have been vaccinated. Only about 56% of eligible Franklin County residents have been vaccinated. And the selfish, misled, conspiracy theory-driven, I believe what I believe people are not getting vaccinated. I'm afraid they won't get their kids vaccinated. The solution to this pandemic is not masks. That is temporary. The solution is vaccination, okay? We need to commit as Grandview parents to vaccinate ourselves and vaccinate our children when it becomes available. This is a public health issue. If you're an adult and you want to ride around on a motorcycle and not wear a helmet, I could not care less. If you want your unvaccinated child unmasked around my unvaccinated child, I have a problem. The science is clear, the logic is clear, and unfortunately, our children are really reaping what the selfish unvaccinated have sown. So, sorry again, I'm just a little upset. But at any rate, I would recommend for unvaccinated children, at least ages 5 through 12 until we get the data, mandatory masking. No one is talking about not having full-time school. People have brought that up. That's a straw man. I haven't heard any discussion of not having full-time school. They would just simply wear a mask. It's not a big deal. I have an entering kindergartner and an entering third grader. They wear masks all the time in public, and they're completely fine with it. It's not child abuse. It's a mask. So mask mandates work. Also, if you don't believe that SARS-CoV-2 affects children significantly, I'm happy to show you chest x-rays of intubated children in the ICU, because it certainly does. So yes, they are less at risk, but they're still at risk, and they can get very sick and die. So months of frustration is building up right now, but these are simple solutions. They should not be driven by politics. They should not be driven by who you voted for or didn't vote for. They shouldn't be driven by conspiracy theories you read on the internet. These vaccines don't contain fetal tissue. These vaccines are not going to cause you to hear Wi-Fi in your head. These are well-studied, well-researched vaccines. Masks have been well-studied, well-researched. They work, and we should use them to help prevent children from getting sick and dying. It's pretty straightforward. Again, the Russian roulette example. Doesn't make sense to not have our kids wear masks. And I'll just say again at the end, this is temporary, and I would have that be part of the messaging. Again, we will have data rolling in starting at the end of September from Pfizer and soon from Moderna, probably in October, for ages 5 through 11, and soon after that, from ages 6 months to 5 years old, we will have the vaccine data. So this is temporary. We're not talking about masking for the rest of our lives. I'll yield. Thank you very much.
One second. Does he have 30 seconds left?
Yeah.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
As we're considering mitigation techniques between hand sanitizer, sanitizing desks, distancing, masks, short of mandating vaccine, what would be the #1 mitigation technique in your opinion?
The number one would be masking, I would think. So there's a benefit. The CDC recommends distancing of 3 feet because unlike some misinformation that was propagated tonight, not only do masks work, but still most transmission is droplet. In special situations, it can be aerosol, but the vast majority is droplet, which is 3 feet. So masking, obviously hand hygiene is helpful. All of these together, you put them together as a mitigation strategy. But masking is very helpful. And again, this was not something that was invented by the CDC with COVID-19. Masking for physicians who see people with respiratory viruses has been the case since I was in medical school 20 years ago. This is well established.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Drew Kell, I live at 1866 West First Avenue. I have a upcoming third grader, which is my main priority for coming to talk tonight, but I'm also an emergency medicine physician here in Columbus, so I have seen COVID firsthand. I've experienced the ravage that is placed on a lot of patients' families, and obviously the society issues that have gone with it too, and I want to firmly express my desire to have masking in our schools universally. Like Dr. Young just said, and we did not coordinate this at all. In fact, I've never met him before, but I agree with everything he just said. Masking is the #1 way that we're going to prevent spread of infection in our schools, and it's the way that we're going to maintain the integrity of our school year. It's how we're going to keep our kids in school, keep them from quarantine, keep them from infection. Right now we're facing a surge of COVID again. It's coming from the south, which is weird seasonally that we'd be seeing a upper respiratory or a respiratory virus surging from warm southern states this time of year. What keeps me up at night is that this Delta variant is more contagious, it's more severe, it's more devastating, particularly for our pediatric patients. So the evidence coming out of Arkansas, and this is relatively new and they're surging down there right now, is close to 10% of hospitalizations are pediatric patients. That's a tenfold increase in what we saw this past winter in pediatric hospitalizations, roughly about 1% of the pediatric hospitalizations. That's our unvaccinated cohort. That's my child. That is what our K through 6 school is. When we move into vaccinated people, well, the vaccine is preventing severe infection. It's not preventing infection as well as we had liked with this new variant, although it's incredibly effective in preventing severe illness. But the other thing it's not really preventing is transmission. So somebody with asymptomatic or mild symptoms of this Delta variant is spreading viral particles, viral shed, at the same rate as an unvaccinated person with the infection or similar rate. The way that we prevent this is through masking. That's evidence, that's data, it's there. At the end of the day, what we want, what everyone in this room wants, is for our kids to be in school learning, to maintain the academic integrity of our school year, to get through COVID. And trust me, nobody wants to be through COVID any more than I do. The way that we're going to do this, the way that we come together as a community, the way that we keep our academic integrity and the integrity of this school year is universal masking. Thank you.
I have one follow-up for Dr. Connell, if I can.
Yes.
As a board, we've received communication from community members that as a small community, that we should do things differently. From your medical professional opinion, like being a small community, are we at any less risk of COVID?
I think our community is in a really good spot overall, but we're in Franklin County, Ohio. This is the most populous county, I believe, in Ohio, if not close to. We're not isolated. We live amongst whoever else is around us. Right? Our kids play sports against other teams, whether it's within the school district or whether it's club sports. We work outside of Grandview Heights. We have family, we have friends, we travel. We are not in an isolated community away from everything else. We need to act as though we are like everybody else. And the way that we do that is following the guidelines and recognizing that I think we are in a good position, but that doesn't mean we're better than the guidelines. And in fact, because of our position and those guidelines, I think that we have a great chance of getting through the school year with universal masking.
Thanks. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Mitchell. I live at 1144 Westwood Avenue, and I am a pediatric cardiologist, so I can speak firsthand to the patients that I have taken care of who have gotten coronavirus infection and who have had severe manifestations of coronavirus infection, including but not limited to severe heart dysfunction necessitating significant life-saving measures. I'm also a parent to 2 upcoming kindergartners, as well as a 7-month-old baby. So my entire family, outside of my husband and I, all of my children are unvaccinated because they are not yet eligible to receive the vaccine. I have a lot of trepidation about sending my unvaccinated kindergartners to school in the middle of a deadly pandemic during, as I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, as the former physician alluded to, during what is a surge of a highly transmissible variant of this virus, as well as understanding the risks that they have to bringing the virus back home to my unvaccinated baby. My recommendations tonight to the board stem from both the American Academy of Pediatrics as well as the Centers for Disease Control. And the American Academy of Pediatrics policy considerations, I'm just going to read it to you here. It says that the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, strongly advocates that all policy considerations for school plans should start with the goal of keeping patients safe and physically present in school. I think that mirrors a lot of what people from both sides of the aisle have said tonight. We want in-person education, and we want to keep our kids safe. The only logical way to do that is by supporting a universal masking policy. I won't read all of this here to you this evening that I've brought, but I'm happy to share it with anybody who is interested. I have policy statements from both the Centers of Disease Control as well as the Academy of Pediatrics. What I think is most concerning to me is this particular paper regarding COVID-19 infection among children and adolescents. I think it is a misconception that children are not at risk to be seriously ill from coronavirus infection. I have seen it firsthand. The Centers for Disease Control have also seen that firsthand. During the past several months and years, there have been 271 COVID-19 deaths among children aged 5 to 17 years. In my medical opinion and in my personal opinion, that is 271 too many deaths for our children. Additionally, there is data that suggests that in unvaccinated individuals, even in the setting of high rates of community transmission, and currently Franklin County is in a substantial rate of viral transmission, that mitigation measures, including layering policies such as masking, help reduce the spread of coronavirus in schools. I won't go over all of the examples that they set forth here, but like I said, I'm happy to share this information with anybody who is interested. The bottom line is that universal masking works. It helps prevent the spread of disease. It helps keep our children safe, and it's relatively easy. I have 2 5-year-old boys who have been wearing masks throughout the entire pandemic, and they have done so just fine. In addition to universal masking, things like cohorting students, I think is also going to be something that is an important consideration to help keep our kids safe and reduce the rates of exposure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Lithgow, and I live at 1226 Parkway Drive. Have lived there for 42 years now. I sent all of you an email earlier today, but I just wanted to put it on the record, so I'm going to repeat a good part of the essence. The 3 doctors who preceded me said things extremely eloquently, so this is going to actually sound like a broken record, but here we go. I was on the school board for 12 years. It's been 10 years now, but I do remember the difficult days, and I don't envy you guys at all. But I know that you're strong and that you can do what's right, because your primary reason for being here is for the best for our kids. More importantly for this discussion, though, is that I am a medical laboratory scientist, currently retired, but I did it for about 45 years. And I very much believe in science. I very much believe in vaccination, and I have believed in vaccination since I was a child. I do remember getting the sugar cube with the polio vaccine on it. That's how old I am. As you talk about getting ready for this school year, I know that your primary objective, aside from keeping the kids safe, is to make sure that they get a good education and they stay here in person, if at all possible. So I just wanted to let you know that, okay, now I'm going to start reading. As the Delta variant spreads, the case numbers keep climbing, and elementary kids are not able to be protected by vaccination yet. It's the responsibility of the adults around them to keep them safe. They don't have a choice, but the adults can be the adults in the room. The best way to keep them safe from this virus is to follow the CDC recommendations, the AAP recommendations that Dr. Mitchell just mentioned, and have all of the students, teachers, staff members, and visitors who walk into school wear a mask at all times. in addition to the distancing and the ventilation that I'm sure that your classrooms will be set up for. If you would happen to make masking optional based on whether the adolescent or adult is vaccinated and giving them the option of not wearing a mask, you know darn well what those teenagers are going to do. Pitch it, because nobody wants to be the weird kid who's wearing a mask. I've been around long enough to remember when universal precautions in healthcare were put in place in the 1980s for bloodborne pathogens. And in my mind, this would be similar to that. We assumed that everybody had a bloodborne pathogen. That way you didn't have to ask, you didn't have to invade anybody's privacy or embarrass them. You just assumed that they had something. And after 30-some years now, it is so routine, I bet you would rear back if your doctor or your nurse did not have gloves on when they touched you. Also, if you have masks, have everybody in the school wear the mask, then nobody has to be the police. It's just accepted. You just do it. You don't have to say, hey, are you one of those ones who's not supposed to have your mask off? You just have, everybody does it. I know it's a hot button issue. I wish this pandemic could have been over by now. You have no idea how disheartening it was, well, you do have an idea because you were there too, how disheartening it was when the numbers started going back up in July after being so low in June. It was just really depressing. It took me a while to get to the point where I could even talk about that one, speaking of mental health. I can give you a few statistics, and I did look up a few after I sent this email to you all. One of the things that I did find is that Ohio is behind both Florida and Texas in the number of vaccinated people. Florida and Texas are among the several states who are experiencing huge outbreaks right now, especially Florida. So you know what that means. That means that Ohio is ripe for a big outbreak. We could join that club. In Florida, there are 12 times more sick children, sick with COVID, than there are in Massachusetts, which is a low incidence, high vaccination state. In Louisiana, there are 10 times more sick kids. And all three of those states start out with 0% of their children under the age of 12 vaccinated. So they all have the same base, but the difference is the number of people around them who have been vaccinated and the number of incidents of COVID in their communities. So I just wanted to pass that little tidbit on to you. I do echo everything that the three doctors said, and I hope that next week when you vote, you keep our kids in the forefront of keeping them safe and keeping them in school for the entire school year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Mark Rastetter. I'm a family physician. I also am on the Board of Health. I volunteer my time there. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Grandview Board of Health, but I did want to mention it just because I care deeply about my family, but I also care deeply about the health of Grandview. I support universal masking in our schools at this point. I don't want it, right? I don't think any of us do. I don't want our children to have to wear masks. I don't want this virus to be ravaging the country. None of us do, but that's the reality. There's no way that we can deny that or understand that we have to face it moving forward. It's also rapidly mutating, which viruses do, and we have to understand that these new variants are significantly more contagious and concerning. I cared for patients on the inpatient ward at Ohio State. I have a large pediatric population that I've cared for as well. So, you know, I don't, as I tell all my patients, I don't recommend for them what I wouldn't recommend for my own family, and I wouldn't recommend for the school, something that I wouldn't recommend for my own kids, obviously. I have a rising kindergartner who's going to be Stevenson this year, and so do I want her to have to wear a mask? I would like to say no, right? But this isn't a personal or family decision because it affects other people, so you can't have that logic going into a respiratory illness. So she will be wearing a mask, and I support and I want everybody else to be wearing a mask. I think for all the reasons that the physicians and the last person who just spoke said make a lot of sense. I support the decision by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I think their data is solid and sound, and I've reviewed it. I'm not going to recap everything else everybody said, but I will go on the public record to say that I support it. And so, yeah, and I think the last point is just I want my children in school. I think there's a huge benefit for having our children in school and staying in school. I think masks do mitigate the spread, and if we're not masking, there is more likely a chance that there'll be an outbreak and that our kids will be sent in some sort of hybrid or from home model, and I think that's a risk for our kids, and I think it's one reason why I absolutely support universal masking, again, and all of the other reasons that were said before. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public participation before we move on? All right, at this point, Mr. Culp has, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a few statements that were sent in. I thank you.
My name is Haley Head. I work in the Office of the Superintendent for the Board of Education, and we received two letters from two community members who could not be here but wanted their voice heard. The first letter I am reading is from Stephanie Klupinski, and she resides at 950 Palmer Road. Dear Superintendent Culp, hello. We are a new family to the Grandview Heights School District. Our oldest daughter will start kindergarten at Stevenson on August 20th. We are excited about this new journey for our family and are grateful to be a part of such an excellent, conscientious, and welcoming school community. I write to you now to share my hope that Grandview Heights follows the lead of the Ohio State University and the Westerville, Gahanna, and Columbus City School Districts by requiring all staff and students to wear masks inside while at school. Like so many others, I am surprised and disappointed that as the new school year approaches, we are once again embroiled in debates over masks. We had all hoped that the wide availability of vaccinations, combined with our enhanced understanding of how COVID-19 is transmitted, would mean that the 2021-2022 school year could open more normally without many of the COVID-19 precautions that schools employed last year. Of course, sadly, that is not the case. The Delta variant is spreading in Ohio and across the country. On August 2nd, 2021, the Columbus Dispatch published that 6 counties in central Ohio, including Franklin, have jumped to the second highest level on the Center for Disease Control's transmission map, indicating substantial community spread. It is the growing threat of the Delta variant that has prompted the CDC and other leading health organizations to recommend that schools require everyone to wear masks indoors. And it's why employers like Walmart and Target are once again requiring employees to wear masks, regardless of vaccination status. While it is true that most children who do get COVID-19 have milder symptoms compared to older people, there have been numerous kids who have suffered tremendously and even died from COVID-19. Obese children, immunosuppressant children, and those with certain underlying conditions are at risk for more severe illness should they contract COVID-19. Our daughter, like many other students at Grandview Heights, I imagine, falls into one of those categories. She has a laryngeal cleft and severe tracheomalacia. We have taken her to the emergency room at least a half a dozen times for breathing complications after she contracts a simple cold. We shudder to think what might happen to her if she were to get COVID-19. My husband and I kept her at home for an entire year, from March 2020 through March 2021. At that point, knowing that teachers had the opportunity to receive the vaccine and feeling comforted by the protocols her schools were using, including mandatory masking and social distancing, we sent her to pre-K. The school continued these protocols for the rest of the year, and I am happy to report there were no COVID cases in her classroom. My child never complained about wearing her mask and was simply thrilled to be able to attend school and see her friends. We understand that no school can ensure that our daughter or any child is completely safe, but we know that there are many steps schools can take to provide a safer environment for staff and students. One of the simplest and most cost-effective steps a district can take now in the face of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic is to require everyone at the school to wear masks while indoors, allowing, of course, for approved medical exemptions. We deeply hope that the Grandview Heights School District continues to wear masks while indoors for all staff and students, and we are happy to support you in any way. Thank you. Stephanie Klupinski, 950 Palmer Road. The second letter I will be reading is written by Patti Zetterberg, and she lives at 1241 Mulford Road. Thank you for the opportunity to have my comments read at this meeting. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. To give you a bit of background about me, my name is Patti Zetterberg. I'm a parent of a rising second grader and a 4-year-old. In my professional life, I have worked in public health law and regulation for over a decade, including as an associate chief counsel in the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's Office of the Chief Counsel. I'm now a professor at Ohio State's Law School, where I teach FDA law and torts, among other things. I am also serving on a National Academies of Sciences committee that is providing advice on public health emergency preparedness to the Department of Health and Human Services Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. I care deeply about this community and our kids, as I know everyone at this meeting does. For that reason, I want to start by acknowledging what I know is our shared goal, providing our kids the best educational experience possible under the circumstances that we're in. On a number of occasions last year, students needed to both quarantine if exposed and isolate if infected. Given the increased contagiousness of the virus, this will increase this year, even with masks. While removing masks may seem optimal in the short term, with the Delta variant and other variants that are emerging, it will lead us to both more infection and need for quarantine. The current COVID surge is expected to peak in mid-October in the U.S. The earlier peak is due to the high infectiousness of the variant. Quite simply, removing mask mandates in schools will increase the chances that we will need to move to hybrid or online learning this fall. In my opinion, our best bet to stay fully open this fall, ensuring the best long-term benefit for all of our kids, is to use a layered public health approach. This should include vaccinations for all eligible, indoor mask use by all, regardless of vaccination status, and ideally improved ventilation, such as with windows and/or HEPA air filters. This layered approach, including masks, would be consistent with CDC and local public health recommendations. It would also be consistent with what other school districts are doing and what Ohio State is doing for the fall. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your consideration of these comments, and I want to thank everyone here for their care for our kids and our schools. Patti Zetterberg, 1241 Mulford Road.
Thank you, Haley.
Anybody else after that for public comment? I just want to make sure, Mr. Colt, before we move on and close that part of the agenda. All right, just as far as our format, I know that the superintendent has a brief, I won't time him and say time, but a brief presentation for us, and then we'll have some discussion. Once again, as a reminder, there's no action item on the agenda tonight. At our August 11th meeting, we will also offer public participation as we do at all our regularly scheduled board meetings. So if you spoke tonight, you're more than welcome to speak again then also, if you have the same or different thoughts in a week. Mr. Colt?
First and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for finding time in their busy schedules to come here and talk and voice their insights, opinions, and views. We intentionally structured a process whereby we would have a meeting tonight to discuss this important issue and providing opportunity for community feedback. And then we'll make a decision at our regularly scheduled board meeting on August 11th. But we intentionally structured it this way so as to provide individuals in our community to give feedback. So thank you to all of you who showed up and shared your views. First off, my name's Andy Culp, and I have the good fortune and privilege of serving as superintendent. I'm also a husband and a father of 3 sons. I have a rising freshman that's going to college this year, my oldest, which is a unique experience for my wife and I. I have a rising senior, and I have a rising freshman in high school. And I will tell you, all 3 of my boys are very active. They're all very different, but they're very active. They have a lot of friends. They like to play athletics. And if you would have asked me in July whether we would be talking about COVID on August 4th, I would have said unlikely. I would have very optimistically predicted that we will likely have a quote-unquote normal year. And I would submit to you that in the last 3 weeks, there's been, as some of the physicians and others in the room have said, a rise in cases. In fact, I received a press release today, and I'm going off memory here, but there were 21 new cases in Ohio today.
2,100.
Yeah, 2,100.
Yeah.
Yes, 2,100. So, again, I share that with you only as just new information. I also think it's important, one of the things that served me well in my 25 years in public education, many of which is in leadership positions, some larger than others, is whenever you have to make a decision that's really challenging, or perceived as challenging, or is challenging, and politically, and as evidenced by all of the speakers today, emotionally charged. Always try and put the kids at the center of the decision. In particular, doing what I do, that's always served me well. And that's what we will intend to do here relative to this decision as well. I do also want to share that it's my perception as I stand here before you today that this board nor I have the authority, because it's been removed legislatively, from moving to a hybrid or remote format of schooling. It's no longer eligible for public schools. Now, is it possible that there will be new legislation in light of some new monumental spike of COVID-19? I guess maybe that is possible, but my understanding, and I affirmed this with our board council, is that the board nor I have that authority to move to a hybrid or a remote model. So I did want to share that just as a point of order. I think it's important also to understand the following. The good news is that in area code 4, the good news from my perspective, because I do believe that vaccinations work, in the area code of 43212, which is Grandview, we have a high percentage of those that are eligible to be vaccinated. So I will say to you that when last I checked, and it's been a little bit, like 6 weeks, I believe we were 43212 in like the 84% of those eligible have been vaccinated, which is obviously relative to Franklin County a lot higher. Again, that's a celebration, at least from my perspective, because I do believe it's a really strong mitigation factor. I also think it's important to understand that those 12 and under have not had an opportunity to be vaccinated. So in my world, sometimes I like to break that down into grades, right? So what does that mean from a grade standpoint? So that's in or around grades K through 6 that have not had an opportunity to be vaccinated, if they are eligible. Like they're not vaccinated. We know for 100% sure well, likely anyway, that kids in kindergarten to 6th grade have not been vaccinated because they're not eligible, because if you're 12 and under, you're not eligible. So I share that with you just to level set and make sure that we all understand those as, well, enduring understandings, for lack of a better word. So, again, I have read also the American Academy of Pediatrics. I have met with ODH. I have met with Franklin County Public Health. I have met with Columbus Public Health. And suffice it to say, I'm just going to share with you that pretty much, not pretty much, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Ohio Department of Health, the CDC, Columbus Public Health, and Franklin County Public Health all strongly recommend that both vaccinated and unvaccinated wear masks in a school setting. So indoors in a school setting, all of those agencies I just listed strongly recommend that both vaccinated and unvaccinated wear masks. So there seem to be three options that we're going to consider as a governance team and ultimately vote on August 11th. So option one is we recommend all students and staff recommend, or you strongly recommend, but in essence, recommend all students and staff wear masks K-12 until November 10th. November 10th, we have a regularly scheduled board meeting, and on November 10th, we can revisit that. We will allow, so oftentimes, one of the caveats there is for recess, and recess generally occurs more, K3 and 4-5 than it does 6-8, but we aren't going to, our current thinking is we would allow for students to take mask breaks and not wear masks outdoors on recess, and we would also cohort them. So during recess, when they're not wearing masks, we would try and cohort them so as to increase our ability to contact trace in the event that there was a COVID positive student. That's option one. Option two, we could recommend that students K-6 are required to wear masks. However, students 7-12 are strongly recommended. So you might ask, well, why K-6? The difference here obviously is a requirement K-6. The rationale behind the difference between this recommendation or option versus the first is those 12 and under haven't had the opportunity to be vaccinated, and so correspondingly, this is a nuance or different option. And then option three is requiring it K-12. So both vaccinated and unvaccinated, all students and staff are required to wear masks. So that's in essence option three. All three of these options would be capped on November 10th at a regularly scheduled board meeting where we would revisit whatever it is that the board votes. So for example, if we were to decide that we're going to begin the school year, hypothetically speaking, K-12 as mask optional, on November 10th you could revisit it and you could require K-6 mask optional 7-12 at the November 10th board meeting. One of the important things I do think, so I grew up in Columbus, I live in Columbus, right, wrong, or indifferent, I have a lot of friends to this day that live in Columbus, both new and old. And so as superintendent, right, wrong, or indifferent, they like to share their views and opinions with me, and I like to talk to them about this. And for whatever reason, this comes up more than I care to admit. But one of the things that is fascinating that I've learned in my conversations with a lot of my friends that they just don't fully understand is if you are not vaccinated, so if you are a student or a staff member who's unvaccinated, so certainly 12 and under haven't been eligible to be vaccinated, and you realize, and you're not masked, and you realize a close contact. So close contact is you are near a COVID positive student for 15 minutes cumulative within 24 hours. This is a requirement, not under the school's purview. This isn't a choice, what I'm about to say. That student or students are required to quarantine traditionally for 10 days. 7 if after 5 of showing symptoms, they do a test, and that test comes back negative, they can come back early. That reality that I just outlined is disruptive to the educational process. Again, as a father of 3 kids, now a little more independent today, but also a wife that works at Nationwide Children's Hospital full-time, having young kids, that reality would be challenging if we had young kids. Versus if you are masked and unquarantined and realize a close contact, there's what's called, you are eligible for a modified quarantine. So what is a modified quarantine? Well, a modified quarantine, you can continue to go to school, you can continue to participate in extracurricular activities, whether that is, football, volleyball, soccer, baseball, band, chess club, etc., provided you're wearing a mask. So I think that's just important to understand so we're all on the same page. Again, those requirements that I just outlined relative to eligibility are established by Franklin County Public Health, ODH. These aren't school quarantine requirements. We are beholden to these. So I do think that is one of the things I've learned in my conversations with my friends, that they typically don't know. Right, wrong, or indifferent. So I just think it's important that we understand that reality so that everybody, so for example, if there are, let's just for fun say a class of 3rd graders, none of which are vaccinated, let's say it's a class of 20, 10 are wearing a mask, 10 aren't. And there's a COVID positive case, they're all exposed. The 10 that aren't wearing a mask in this scenario all would have to go home for 10 days. The 10 that were wearing a mask could continue to go to school and participate in extracurricular if they, for example, play travel soccer, because they are eligible for a modified quarantine. I just think that's important for everyone to understand.
Sorry, can you clarify that? Because your second point there says that the eligibility for a modified quarantine is predicated on all students being masked.
Excellent.
And that if there is a student unmasked, then the entire classroom is no longer eligible, which to me suggests that the masked children are also no longer eligible.
So, excellent. So, to make this more complicated, when we completed, so last year at the end of the school year, most every school district in Franklin County anyway, was under a universal mask programming. So the way in which you qualified for modified quarantine was the entire class had to be masked. Mm-hmm. And if one kid or 2 weren't masked, and others were, even those that were, would not be eligible for a modified quarantine. Right now, as I sit here before you today, the requirements that all school districts in Franklin County and Ohio haven't been released. It's my belief that ODH will release them by Friday. I don't have a crystal ball, but I hear things in my position because much to my dismay, over the last 15 months, I've gotten to know a lot of people that work in Franklin County Public Health and Columbus Public Health, and so I hear things. This is my belief. This isn't written in stone. It's my belief that ODH is going to release new guidance for eligibility for modified quarantine, and it is going to be solely contingent upon whether a student is masked, not whether all students in the class were masked. That's my belief.
And if I may, Mr. Culp, it is certainly our hope as a board that we have that clarification by the time we meet next week. And so, we don't know if that time frame will work or not, but that's the hope and desire.
So again, that I was hoping and figured that by this meeting we would have that information. We don't. So what I listed up there, you correctly pointed out, was how the school year ended last year for eligibility for modified quarantine. So my sense is that's going to change. And it's going to change based on masking. By the way, this PowerPoint I'll post on the webpage for everyone. You're happy to take pictures, but it will be posted on the webpage.
Will you make that note that was last year's stuff and waiting Neil when you do post that.
I will.
Thank you.
So I kind of touched on this slide. I don't want to be redundant, but in essence, there's a difference between a traditional quarantine and a modified quarantine. A traditional quarantine is 10 days. Again, they have changed that to you are able to come back after 7 if after 5 days of symptoms you take a test and you test negative. So some of the considerations are analogous to what I just said. Now you could accuse me of these are opinions, but based on the understanding of eligibility or the benefits to you as a father, a school system for modified quarantine versus a traditional quarantine, I'm drawing some conclusions. One, for unvaccinated persons and their choice or requirement to wear a mask impacts their likely eligibility for a modified quarantine as opposed to a traditional quarantine. I mean, that's just a fact. So, if masks are optional and your unvaccinated son or daughter isn't wearing one, you are not going to be eligible, and you're exposed, you're not going to be eligible for a modified quarantine. I mean, that's just going to be a fact. Eligibility for a modified quarantine impacts Grandview Heights schools and our ability to meet our stated mission and grow kids, to provide consistency with respect to attendance. Not only that, it impacts mom and dad. Again, my wife works full-time, I work full-time, we have 3 boys. Now, thankfully, my youngest is now 15. So, if he had to do a traditional quarantine, he could, mom wouldn't have to stay home from work, or I wouldn't have to stay home from work. But if he were 5 or 6 or 7, that'd be a different game. So that does create a stress, in particular when mom and dad both work. Now, this was shared with me, and I put it up here. And there's going to be people in this room that disagree with this statement. But it did resonate with me. And that is this idea of, we talk a lot about social emotional health and well-being. Full disclosure, my wife is a counselor. That's what she does at Children's, okay? She works with the most intense and challenging kids in Franklin County. That's what she does. So one of the insights that was given, I can't take credit for this, but it did resonate with me, is this idea of if masks aren't required in that K6 ban or K8 ban or K7 ban, will they feel stress and pressure to not wear a mask? Or conversely, will they feel stress or pressure to wear a mask? Conversely, if you aren't wearing a mask, would you get made fun of? Conversely, if you are wearing a mask, would you get made fun of? And so all of those social, emotional pressures that could be associated in young adolescents and masking are negated in the event that it is required K6. Or, for example. Again, not my insight, but it was one that did resonate with me. Because it resonated with me because I think there might be some truth to it. Again, it's just my opinion, but it did resonate with me. We are going to have the same lunch protocols that we had last year. I garnered from some of the comments today that we have some first-time parents, so you probably don't know what that means. But generally speaking, well, not generally speaking, we only allow 9 through 12 students to go home for lunch. So last year we allowed K-12 students to go home for lunch if that was something that you could work out. We did request that you were able to establish set criteria and dates and times that you were doing it, so it wasn't like just-in-time pickup of kids. But the thinking there was to, one of the biggest areas of concern from my perspective was lunch and the close proximity of lunch. And so one of the ways that we structured lunch last year was we allowed for kids to go home for lunch, thus reducing the number of students eating together in a cafeteria. We also spread lunch tables out. So like, for example, we spread them out here. We also spread them out down that hallway. And so that spread kids out so that we had plexiglass on the tables. So obviously you can't eat and wear a mask at the same time, and if you're unvaccinated. So that we are going to do that, or provide that opportunity for parents if they want to do it. Kids Club is in full effect, this year. As you recall, or some of you may recall, Kids Club wasn't in full operation last year. This year it will be. They will follow the same masking protocols that the board ultimately votes on. This is a federal mandate. It is analogous to flying on an airplane where you are required to wear a mask. This isn't a board decision. This isn't a superintendent decision. This isn't, this is a requirement by law that on buses you have to wear a mask. So that's just the way that is. There is no discretion. There's no discussion. It is that way. Now, as you probably all know, in Grandview, we don't have buses to and from school. It's obviously going to be extracurricular athletics that you'll have to be required to wear a mask. Obviously, we're going to get back to teaching and learning and all of the things that we know are best practices in terms of maximizing and personalizing student growth and learning. We are going to do the same additional mitigation strategies that we knew worked. So we'll have hand sanitizer stations in all areas. We will do our very best to maintain 3 to 6 feet distancing. In almost all instances, we'll be able to maintain 3 feet distancing where possible. We do have MERV 13 filters throughout all of our buildings, K-12. And we are going to, again, be asking if your son or daughter is showing symptoms of COVID-19, that you not send them to school. We're going to continue to make sure that we do deep cleanings every day, every night of our facilities as well. I mentioned mental health. We have a wonderful team of mental health specialists, and certainly this is going to continue and has been a focus of ours. We have a tremendous staff, and this is a real strength of this district. In terms of athletics, we again have a full fall athletic schedule. OHSSA basically indicated that at this time, you're full go. So football is full go, volleyball is full go, cross country is full go, and at this point I see nothing changing relative to those activities. As always, we will continue to adjust and adapt based on the fact set that we are faced with as a governance team. And we'll continue to learn and grow and hear perspectives from our community and continue to keep kids at the center of our decision making.
All right. Questions from the board for Mr. Kell?
Andy, I have one question. If we were to consider a mask mandate and there was another district that did not have a mask mandate and we were playing, for instance, an indoor volleyball game, would like the home team rules be in effect, or how will that work?
Yeah, so the mask mandate that we are considering as a governance team is for the school day. And certainly could apply to certain extracurricular after-school programming like Kids Club. But for extracurricular activities, say volleyball, for example, we would ask that you keep 3 to 6 feet of distancing, but we're not going to ask players to wear masks during a volleyball competition or during a football game. So the focus here is using the strategies that we know and are proven to have worked based on what we did towards the latter part of the school year. So 3 to 6 feet distancing, masking, if either highly recommend or require certain age groups, hand sanitizing, health monitoring daily.
Great, thanks.
All right, discussion, the board with each other?
Who wants to kick it off?
I would like to thank the public participation, obviously. Medical professionals, we appreciate your expertise. Parent professionals, you all have children in the district, so you're all experts in that regard. So thank you for your public participation. I, for one, I'm a teacher, and I have some educational experience last year. The district that I was teaching in started remote. We then went sort of half-time. Kids were in the buildings on Mondays and Thursdays, or Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then we rotated one other day. And I will say that students in the building, when the rooms were half full, had an educational impairment, I would call it. It certainly was not the normal experience. I will say that when the kids came back full-time in March, it was a huge difference. My first period class, I always said, was kind of creepy quiet. There were so few kids, and the educational experience was so impeded by the lack of students in there. When they all came back together, and this is just me personally, this was my own personal experience, I can't speak for everyone, but having all the kids back together in the school made a huge difference. They had masks on, but once they were all back together, that made a huge difference. I think masking is going to keep kids in school, and I think that's the main thing that we have to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's Kevin, well, first, again, thank you to everybody who spoke. It was all really interesting, well thought through. We don't always agree with each other, but I'd like to think, and by and large, it's been true that in Grandview, even when we disagree, we can do so civilly. And that is so appreciated, because it's okay to have differing opinions, as long as, we're respectful to each other. And I know from talking to people in other school districts that it's been great here. It really has been. So we should be proud as a community for that. I am so thankful that right now the conversation is not about whether or not the kids are going to be in school full-time, 5 days a week. So, that is a win. And as a couple people said, to me, I don't want to belabor the issue because I don't see it as, this is my personal opinion, is that, we're just talking about whether or not a kid wears masks. That's not the big argument. Last year was the big argument. Kids are going to go to school, and that's awesome. And yeah, pretty much to echo Kevin, I think, and as several people said, I think our duty is to keep kids in school, keep them safe, get a good educational experience. And for now, you've seen the list of organizations that all share the same opinion based on their expertise, that kids should be masking, and we've heard that from every physician that spoke today. I trust their opinion. I wish my kids didn't have to wear a mask, but I have a third grader and a fifth grader. Neither one of them can be vaccinated yet. I feel safe. I know there are a lot of other people in the same position as me, so I'd like to think we can all come together and support this. I think it's what's important for our kids.
My turn.
Yeah, go
All
for
right.
it.
We're going to go down the road. This is great. To echo my colleagues, thank you all. It's nerve-wracking to get up and talk in front of people. I'm a teacher like Mr. Gousset, so I've kind of gotten used to it. And what I'm at is there's not any medical or scientific entity, agency that's saying masking is bad. To me, it's kind of, when you take the emotion out of it, but let me back up. We need to address, we're tired. This has gone on for 18 months. I remember I had on my whiteboard in my classroom, March 15th, 2020, and when I came back in August, it was still there. And for whatever reason, I never erased it, and that date kind of haunts me, because I'm like, I thought we were going home for 2 weeks. Maybe it was naive, maybe it was innocent, and now we are August 4th, 2021, and we're still here. It's exhausting, it's tiring, it's emotions. We're talking about our kids. But to me, as much as this is exhausting, when you take the emotions out of it, our kids are going back to school full-time, 5 days a week. Every medical scientific agency is saying, put a mask on them. It's, from where I'm looking, it's a no-brainer. I want my child to go to school. I want to teach my children. You know, this is where we are at. We thought we got through it, and then our old girl Delta came back, and hey, here we are. So it's frustrating, but I don't want it to be an argument. I don't want divide in the community. I've said it before and I'll say it again. These schools are our heart and our soul. We need to protect them. We need to do the best for these kids. We also need to do the best for each other. If it's putting a mask on, let's put a mask on. If it's getting a vaccine, let's get a vaccine. Like, let's care and let's be kind to each other as we're moving forward. I do believe one of our public participants said it over, the coronavirus is not going away, and I believe it was you that said until we have quarantining, we're here. I would like this to have been done this summer, but it's not. And this virus may never go away, it really may not, but until we can get rid of quarantining, until we can vaccinate from wherever, we're here. So let's be kind, let's treat each other, I want to say, with compassion, respect each other's decisions. This isn't an argument. This is what's best for our kiddos. Half of our kids, nothing has changed from March 15th, 2020 to August 4th. Half of our students, nothing has changed. They can't get vaccinated. It's here, so I don't want to do it, but I'm like, let's mask up, let's get back to school, let's have an opportunity to learn, let's hang out, let's go to football games, let's do it all. But we're here, and I've stated my case, so I'm going to kick it to you.
Any other discussion?
No, I mean, well, I just one more thing to add, but I think it's all been said. It's been said by people that spoke, but that, you know, I forget, someone said it this way, and it's right, that it really can't be, in my opinion, considered a personal choice when a personal choice has an impact on others. And so that's what really plays into this. It's not like choosing whether, like someone said, who used the motorcycle helmet equation. You know, it's not like that where one person's decision doesn't impact others. We are all working together on this, and so it's a matter of common good, not just personal freedom. So, you know, both are important, but they can't always work together right now.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Anything else?
I do. We've read in emails a lot about parent decision, and I do want to address that. I would like for this to be a parent decision on what to do. The virus has changed, and it's Emily had said it, and a couple other people. If Mr. Truitt here does not wear his mask or vaccinated, it affects me, and that affects Emily's kids, who affects Kemily? Ooh, boy, sorry about that. Kevin's kids, like, it's a chain effect. I want for this to be a parent decision. I really do, but we're not there yet. We are not there on the scope of the containment of the virus, the safety of our children, the vaccination. We just simply are not where it's a parent choice at this point. I want it to be. I really do. I want to make decisions well, I kind of am making a decision for my own child, but you know, I want us to get there as a society. I want us to get through this part of the virus, but as a public institution, I don't know that we're there. And I thought of this analogy. You know, we have wheelchair ramps for our students. Not every student needs it, but we have them here. We want to maximize and personalize the education. How we do that is by having all kids here And we do the best to keep them safe, to meet their medical needs, and to protect them. And that's the thing that, it's the protection of the kids.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to interrupt you, but it's just more to.
We could talk all
we're
night, it's fine,
basically
we're good.
just Talking together. But, you know, a couple of people emailed, because, you know, obviously we receive lots of emails that go beyond the people who chose to speak tonight. And a couple of different people raised the fact that it is the duty of a public school system to serve all kids, down to the most vulnerable of kids. And I think this is part of it. And like, as you're saying, when it comes to a ramp or, you know, serving all kids under IDEA, that it is our duty to make sure that all kids down to the most vulnerable are taken care of. And I see this as part of that
I would
as a public school district.
I would almost argue that when we get to discrimination, House Bill 244, with the numbers, I know you know, and you can email me and tell me the correct one. Masking the kids, I think, is universally would be not discriminating against anyone. Because when we start, you can have a mask and you can't have a mask. Like when we start getting and going beyond that, to me, I'm like, this is where it is. I think you had your hand raised, and the teachers and me like, yes.
I was just going to inquire logistically, if you go with either option 1 or 2, which I believe was to strongly recommend but not require universal masking, how do you plan to do that?
So I apologize. I really don't mean to cut off any questions, but I'm not sure we're prepared for that at this point. However, if you email that to Andy, he will get back with that. And I apologize, this isn't the forum for it. I'm really not trying to
I did that.
affirm, but yeah, this.
I did
is
that,
where we
but
are.
there was I wrote it down, thank you, and apologies. I wrote it down under the mask option number 2. You had recommend to mandate. The wording on that seemed a little weird to me, unless I've just.
It would be a recommendation of the board to mandate K-6 or
Right.
require K-6 masking, highly recommend 712, was the way
Okay.
it was worded.
I think what it was throwing me off was option number 1 was strongly recommend, option number 2 was recommend to mandate, and then option number 3 was mandate across the board. And it could be a me issue
No,
where
no.
I'm like,
That's good feedback. I'll go back and look at that.
you know.
And just remember, as a board, I mean, the superintendent has presented 3 options. We as a board or any individual board member can make, you know, a motion that varies from those. I think because of the legal language, if there's an option you want to explore, you can do what you want, but I think it would be good to talk to Mr. Kell before next Wednesday so we don't end up with a motion that isn't properly written. With all the details. Is that fair?
Can I ask 2 questions before our next meeting? Can we have the numbers of family students that are in multiple buildings? Do you follow what I'm asking?
I think so.
Like have students in both
yeah.
RLS and.
Or you have a student and a high schooler in Larson, or you have a student in Larson, and I know that we had that last time. We talked about hybrid versus remote. If we were gonna if we were doing different schedules for high school versus Stevenson, we wanted to know how many families it would affect. And then how was it decided, and I think this is a good thing, to review this? Like this, no matter what the board decides, it is temporary. How did we pick November 10th?
So I picked November 10th because it's 3-4 months out.
Mm-hmm.
It's a regularly scheduled board meeting.
Mm-hmm.
3 months out in this virus cycle can bring about dramatic change for the good or for the worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seemed like, and I also didn't want for anyone to perceive this to be a decision that was going to be made for the entire year. So I wanted to be very intentional about putting a date on it for which we would review the decision relative to masking again.
And so, if I may, in this scenario where the board is likely to vote a week from now on some sort of scenario from recommend to require, that decision is now landed with us, so to then change that would call for another action of the board. And so, I think the superintendent at this point is saying, at this point, I'd come back on November 10th and sort of review where we are. The board at any regularly scheduled board meeting, or frankly, a special meeting, I think I like to do these things at regular board meetings when we can, could always say to do that. So when people ask the thing, it's like, well, what you need is one person to make a motion, another to make a second, and 3 to vote on it. And if you don't have that, then it doesn't change. I mean, and I don't mean to make this over parliamentary, but, once we, what we're not doing as a board is saying, sort of like we did last year, superintendent, you have the authority to make these decisions, we'll weigh in, go. Once we're making the decision, then it changes when the board makes a decision. And so it's in the process, not to oversimplify that something's complicated. The way whatever decision's made next week changes is by a motion, a second, and a vote. And that's, just right down to it. Because I think people will legitimately ask that question. So if Kevin Gousset comes September, October, wants to make a motion that's different, then we can entertain that. And that, that's how it's supposed to work, right? I mean, there's 5 of us, not 1 of us.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess, like I think it was Dr. Young said, was really saying that in messaging how important it is, and I know that we have been saying this hopefully through the whole time, but it is temporary. We know that Pfizer has said that they plan to seek authorization in September. We're hopeful that 5 to 11-year-olds will be able to be vaccinated, by late fall, early winter, and, and Israel and UK have kind of seen Delta sort of start to, or not Israel, I'm sorry, India. They had a peak with Delta, and then it sort of starts to slide off. And so, I mean, we can be hopeful that all that's going to happen. And so, yeah, I definitely see any decision we're making regarding masking being temporary.
Yeah. Any other discussion?
You want to say anything?
Nope. Motion
Okay.
for adjournment? Is there a second?
Second.
Beth, please call the roll.
Mrs. Gephardt?
Aye.
Mr. Gousset?
Aye.
Mr. Truitt?
Aye.
Ms. Wassman?
Aye.